40 to 50 middle-aged bloke who's fishing, very, very few women, and again there seems to be people that come into the sport and then leave at 16 but then come back to it in later life. So I very much support the points made earlier about encouraging young people into fishing, and it's actually part of the National Angling Strategy in the UK, a document that's been produced by the Angling Trust, which is our angling association, and one of their key things is getting young people out fishing. So it's interesting that it's the same across the world. So what I'm going to talk about today is a piece of work that we've been doing over the past 3 years, Sea Angling 2012, which is a survey of recreational sea angling activity, economic value in England. So I guess we've heard quite a lot about this. Why are we doing these surveys? Well, I should hit home again that we need this evidence base to ensure that that angling is properly represented in the development of policy. Without an evidence base, you don't get a seat at this table. And sea angling catch activity and value are important at a number of different levels. You've got local government, you've got national government, you've got the European requirements. So we as in Europe have to report catches of anglers, of cod, bass, now sharks, salmon and eels to the European Commission. It's a statutory requirement. One very interesting thing, there's a talk about what we might do in terms of valuation. Well, in the successor to the data collection framework, which is the snappily titled EU multi-annual programme, there is a requirement that we collect socio-economic information as well, so that might help you guys going forwards. But it's not just about government, it's also about angling bodies. Angling bodies need these data to develop their own policies and their own lobbying positions, and I know that Jan's very much a fan of collecting data and the need for data to be able to lobby. So, what did we do within Sea Angling 2012? Well, we were interested in 4 things really. How many anglers are there? How many trips do they fish? What do they catch from shore and boats? How much do people spend? But it's not just about what people spend. Well, what else do they gain from it? So what are the other benefits of angling? And it sounds like quite an easy thing to go out and do until you find in the UK there is no sea angling licence. So we have no list of people that fish in the UK, so it makes it a lot more difficult for us to do things. So what we had to do was we designed a set of surveys, which is kind of represented over on the right-hand side of the page. We did a household survey. So this is trying to work out how many people go out fishing and how many trips they carry out a year. We did a shore and private boat survey. Because we have no saltwater licence, we had to send people out to survey areas of coastline around the country in a very, very statistically rigorously designed manner, but I won't go into that now. Charter boats are a lot easier. Charter boats, we know how many charter boats there are around the country, so we could just sample, take a representative sample from those boats, and we asked them to report a monthly diary for us. Economic value and social benefits, we did some online surveys. We got about, I think, 2,500 responses to those surveys, and we used our population survey to try and correct for the biases that you would get in online reporting. Because it's a self-selecting population, you don't have a representative set of the population. And we tried to do this in quite an interesting way. We tried to do it in very much in collaboration with the angling community. So we had a steering group of key members of the angling community, academics and government, and we worked very closely with these guys to try and develop the best data set possible that could be of use to everyone. When we started, one example, when we started we weren't planning to do anything about social benefits, and that was something that came through very strongly from the angling members of our steering group, was we really want to know about the other things that angling does, not just these. So we could do that quite easily, and we adjusted our survey account accordingly. So, in the UK, how many people go see angling? Well, we did a national survey of about 12,000 households. We found that about 2.2% of our population, adult population, went sea angling, which accounts of just over 1 million in Great Britain, the majority of which are in England. How much do they spend? Well, this was the online survey that we did, which we corrected for biases. Direct spend, almost £1.25 billion. Once you take off taxes and imports, that translates to about 831 million into the economy, supporting over 10,000 jobs and a gross value added of about 360 million. Once you start taking into account all of the knock-on effects, you know, the indirect and induced spend, the total value is about 2.1 billion, 23,000 FTEs and 980,000 gross value added. So there's a lot of people that go, and they spend quite a lot. We also have got some specific data on local trip spend. We can look at that from our on-site surveys, but we also did some case studies of different locations around England. And one very interesting thing is that the types of fishing that are available very much affect the amount of spend that you get. So we had one location that was very much dominated by charter boats, and the spend going to those locations was much higher than if you were just going to the shore to fish. So there are ways that you can think about developing angling tourism and the amount that you get spent locally. So what about the social benefits of sea angling? Well, for 60% of people who responded to the survey, it was their way of coming into contact with nature and wildlife, and it brought them to coastal communities more often, so there was a tourist aspect to it. About 20% of our people were also involved in environmental improvements, things like beach cleanups, picking up litter, stuff like that, and also kind of the social type programs, rehabilitation programs that we have in the UK. And it's not just important socially, it's also important physically. People thought that it was a way of gaining physical exercise and relaxation, and these are very important, I think, in today's highly stressed, multiple email society. So we also asked people what would increase the amount of sea angling that you do. So we were interested in this, and you wouldn't be surprised to find out that the biggest thing was better fish stocks. But there are also things that you know, there are things that to do with time pressure, the distance that you have to travel, the cost of actually going, and things that we couldn't do anything about, especially this year, like the bad weather. We did some online catch surveys. These also showed that the majority of anglers perceived that there was a decline in both numbers of fish that they caught and the size of fish that they caught, and that this was more marked the longer the period that you looked at. So what about people going sea fishing? How often did they go, and what did they catch? Well, you've got different platforms here. So you've got people fishing from the shore, people from private and rental boats, and people from charter boats. And these are the numbers of days fishing. So you see that you've got almost 4 million fishing days in the UK. About 3 million of them were from the UK, from shore. So we've got predominantly people going shore fishing. The mean number of fish caught. I was very impressed in Canada that you catch 10 fish every time you go, whereas our figures are slightly lower unless you're going out on a charter boat. In terms of that, then translates to the number of fish that were caught. So it's roughly about 10 million fish that were caught in England in 2012, and they split roughly between shore and private boats. One thing which is really interesting is the high release rates. We're seeing almost 3/4 of the fish released from shore and almost half from boats. So it is very, very important to understand what happens to those fish after they're released, and to actually try and enhance your survival of fish that you release as much as is possible. So, and those release rates were dependent on lots of different things. They might be the survival of fish that you release. So you saw very high release rates of sharks, and almost no release rates of things like mackerel that don't go back at all. So, quite interesting stuff. In terms of what people caught, the majority of people caught mackerel. This is by numbers. Then the humble whiting, the sportfish bass, millions of dogfish, and then down to dab and cod and pollock. So this is where it starts to get interesting. One of the reasons for doing these surveys was to actually provide information opposite our requirements in Europe. So we've estimated total catches and kept weights of bass and cod. So they're somewhere in the region of between 400 to 700 tonnes for bass, kept somewhere between 250 and 450 tonnes. In cod, they're slightly higher. Release rates in cod were lower than in bass, and the majority of fish were caught from our private boats in both of those things. So, they're not insignificant numbers, but what does this actually mean? Well, what we've got here are, and I've got a similar figure for cod, but I don't have time to put it up today, but I can show it to anyone that's interested. What we've got here are recreational and commercial catches. So these are the landings of Cefas into the UK, as opposed to the recreational catches. And we've got them for France, the Netherlands and England. And what you can see is that roughly the recreational catch is about a third of the commercial. So we're important in terms of value, we're important in terms of numbers, and we're important in terms of catch. And that's not a bad thing, because that means that you get a seat at the table. So, in conclusion, very, very brief description of quite a lot of work. Sea angling is a major recreational activity with high economic value and important social benefits. A high proportion of fish are released alive, and that depends on the type of fishing. We've got quite a lot of uncertainty in our results, and that's why we presented ranges rather than actual numbers. But the amounts that we're seeing are consistent with what you see across the rest of Europe. There's a very big report on that website. In fact, you can read different lengths of report. There's a 2-page, there's a 12-page, and then there's hundreds of pages in the background. It's all available, it's all freely out there. The data are going to be made available as well, so anyone can go and look at them, because we want this to be as transparent as possible. So all I need to do now is say thanks to all of the people that we've worked with in terms of the people that provided data, the steering group for their support, and also the people that funded it. Thank you.
Only one question.
Okay, can we go back to the bass?
Yeah, sure. I thought you might say that.
And before that, you talk about GB, Great Britain and England and so on. This sea angling study is about which?
Right, the catches are for England, because we can tell you the numbers of anglers in Great Britain, because the survey that we did at a national level included Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So the actual catches are for England.
We can take one more question if someone.
No, but I didn't get started.
All right, let's go to lunch.
So,
sorry.
figures. Catch figures and socioeconomic figures are very important, and when we look at the bass here, you all know the U.S. striped bass wonder, and we would have liked to see something happen in Europe, but it's European disaster when it comes to bass. There was no commercial bass fishing of importance before in the 60s and the 70s. And now we see figures, and you say that, here you can see, you don't explain, you just say big figures, 50% compared to the commercial angling takes out, therefore this is important. Go 44 decades back in time, recreational fishing took far the most of the bass. So you will have had a totally different picture, but no disaster. And that's my point. We need figures. And we would have liked to have had them long time before, so we had some trends, so we could have a more qualified discussion about what this means, this still picture. Because the reality means that commercial fishing has overfished the bass stocks compared to the impact we have. If there had been no commercial fishing, there would have been no bass stock trouble today, because we cannot simply overfish alone. But together with the commercials we can. And now the point is that it's all about politics in the end. When we have all the figures, all the good trend stories, and then the rest is about allocation between the exploiter and the commercial fishing and recreation. And I don't ask or want the scientists to go into this. This is a political battle, but we are very weak in this battle now, because the commercial fisherman has the trend figures back in time. We don't have anything. We just have the so-called anecdotal information.
Well, I guess there are quite a number of questions there, and I guess in terms of, I take your point about reconstructing trends back in time, and that's something that we're starting to look at with a PhD student I've got, who's going to start to reconstruct things like match records, catch records, and look to see whether they are indicators. They follow any of the other kind of series that we have in terms of population sizes, spawning stock biomasses, stuff like that, or landing status. So we might have some information about that. I don't think that you can say that necessarily that recreational angling has had no impact on those stocks, because we don't know what the situation was 20 years ago, what the take was. And bass is something that's very driven by single strong year classes. I guess the only point I'm trying to make from this is that when we think about management of bass, we need to think about both recreational and commercial. It's one of those stocks where we should be looking to some of the examples that are being done in the States, and thinking about how we manage this stock, because it's important both recreationally and commercially. So, I start working on kind of stock assessments for bass, and that's something that we need to think about going forwards. I think it's an important commercial and recreational fish, so we need to go down the co-management route with it.
Okay.
Can I just make a brief
Okay.
comment? If we look at our friends in the wildlife management area, fish and wildlife are very similar in the management. We found that commercial harvesting of wildlife is a disaster. We've never been able to keep a wildlife population going and harvest it commercially. We've driven birds, we've driven marine mammals, we've driven deer, we bring all kinds of things to extinction, or near extinction, by commercial harvesting. I'm not saying that recreational harvesting cannot do the same, but if you pay people a lot of money, and you've got a huge industry, then it will drive it to extinction. So I think that's a very important thing to realize. We have to manage both.